By far the most meaningful issue within the gendered equitability form has been birth control, how the familial unit is meaningfully structured, given the realities of the bodies the species lives within. Where birth control is understood as the methods whereby the species manages and controls the birth rate, lineages, parentage, and hence too, sexuality. Along the same lines, the realities and pragmatics of raising children form the other major aspect of gendered equitability. Folks may typically understand this as reproductive rights. The framework of this piece, however, is to understand such issues as methodologies to constrain the otherwise free for all fuckfest that would occur. In other words, birth control. Birth control in this context refers to the myriad of ways via socio-cultural and technological constructs that the human species utilizes to control the birth rates and parentage. In this sense, such things as, for instance, the practice of marriage and sexual fidelity is understood as a method of birth control, as it controls the birth rate and the parentage. This series is going to firstly give a broad critique of how folks are generally understanding the issues of gender equality, and then give some specific underdeveloped points, mostly as they relate to sexual consensuality within a dynamic, asymmetrical, heteronormative complex, with a significant queer component. The piece holds at least the following principles, which are utilized as the means of critical analysis and synthesis on the topics. In other words, aspects that do not conform to at least these principles are treated as highly suspect. 1. There are some meaningful biological differences between men and women. 1a. The degree and meaningfulness of these differences as it relates to any given issue, however, is wildly underdetermined in the current dialogues on the matter. This piece largely tends to ignore those differences in favor of something akin to equality as being the norm. See point 2. 2. People regardless of gender ought to be treated as equally as possible. 2a. Such equality entails a kind of equitability, due to 1. Rather than strict equality. 3. In general, that sex is a good, or at the very least that sex isn't a bad. Sex positivity is a norm. 4. Consensuality is a norm and a good when it comes to sexuality. Sex and sexuality are good, or at least not a bad, though there can be circumstances that make it a bad. Among these are non-consensuality. The claim is that consensuality is the norm and generally always has been. This point deserves a bit of clarification. Consensuality has always been the norm, contrary to certain rape culture narratives. While there are instances wherein that is or has not been the case in various cultures, and throughout history, the norm has always been consensuality. 5. Another bad that arises from sexuality are conflations between dating cultural norms and long-term relationship cultural norms. This bad runs both ways. The taking of a potentially valid dating sexual cultural norm and applying it as a valid long-term relationship cultural norm is a bad, but so too is taking a long-term relationship cultural norm and applying it to a dating cultural norm. 6. Another making sexuality into a bad is the mistaking of aesthetical ethical concerns as obligatory ethical concerns. See The Odd Questions of Privilege, A Slight History of Colonialism for the foundational argument providing this distinction. 6a. Although this doesn't exhaust the import of this ethical point in this piece, among the principally important aspects of this ethical distinction is the conflation of aesthetical modalities of sexuality, the lebke plus, as if those aesthetics of taste were applicable as ethically obligatory behavioral norms. Understanding that any given sexual orientation can partake in this bad, though in history the main bad therein is generally stemming from the heterosexual disposition, whereby they smear the queers, taking their aesthetics of sexuality, and applying it as if it were an ethically obligatory kind of thing. 7, 5 and 6 have applicability in sexual ethics as it relates to mating and dating practices more generally. The conflation of merely aesthetical ethical concerns that inform dating norms as if they were ethically obligatory kinds of concerns. This constitutes a big bad kind of ethical foul. 8. We do not generally live in a patriarchy, nor for that matter a matriarchy. Rather we live within a heteronormative complex with a significant queer component. This is not something new, rather such has generally always been the case. While there are exceptions, the norm throughout human history across every culture has been thus. 9. For the sake of brevity and neatness of the textualization, the author uses the term queer inclusively to include what is commonly referred to as the lebke plus community. Moreover, due to points 3 and 8, this piece holds the view that the H for heterosexual properly speaking belong within the neoclassical formulation of lebke plus, and that the whole notion therein essentially simplifies to sex positivity. In other words, the view that sex is a good, or at the very least not a bad, and that its various specifications can be succinctly noted as queer, rather than its various specifications as such, lebke plus. Partly such is a textual convenience. We may hold such as being pertinent simply in virtue of its convenience in textualization and vocalization of the concept. Partly such is argued for and held as being preferable due to its inherent inclusiveness. The normalization of the queer as such entails the normalization of all the sexualities, though not without qualification. So queer as a term holds that all the sexualities are normalized, humanized, but that their ethical, cultural, and other sorts of characteristics may yet be qualified. 10. Ultimately this piece holds that there are no particularly meaningful differences between these sexual orientations in regards to ethical concerns. If sex positivity is accepted, then it follows rather directly that the ethical considerations of sexuality are generally applicable to all sexual orientations. 11. Gender expression and sexuality are not the same things. Gender expression is a cultural disposition of the differences between men and women's bodies. Sexuality is understood as sexual dispositions towards certain bodies as regards reproductive organs. See points 1 and 2 and their subpoints. 11a. Gender expression is a fundamental basis for cultural expressions. How people express their gender is exactly a cultural disposition. 11b. Gender expression is strongly related to, but not synonymous with, the intricacies involved in how people functionally relate to each other in terms of finding a lover. In other words, there may be more to gender expression than merely the issues regarding finding a lover, but gender expression is a major component to finding a lover. 11c. Sexual orientation refers to sexual interest in bodies, more pointedly, genital preference. 11b. A kink is to have some sexual attraction predicated upon cultural expression. 11e. To have a gender is to have some cultural expression. 11f. Hence, when folks are referring to sexuality, they are referring to sexual orientation as a matter of bodies, and gender as a matter of cultural expression. 12. Properly speaking, people in general are queer, that is, sexuality and gendered expressions are technically fluid in form. Folks may lean this or that way, folks may have preferences towards this or that body, however, few if any are those who actually are one and only one sexuality or gendered expression. This because queer simplifies to sex positivity, and few are those who are actually sex negative, even if they profess to be so. Likewise, such is the case because gendered expression is defined via intercultural gendered expression, rather than any given specific gendered expression. Put simply, gender and sexuality are both dynamic relationships that occur through the complex interactions of people interacting with differing dispositions and stemming from differing cultural norms. 12a. Nonetheless, heterosexuality is the nominal norm, and perhaps may always be the nominal norm. This because heterosexuality is the base predicable form of the human body. That is, penile/vaginal sex is how babies are generally made. Heterosexuality may not be reducible to the mereness of penile/vaginal sex, but it is characterized as such via sexual orientation, in that sexual orientation refers to genital preference. 12b. Similarly, the cultural norm is predicated upon heterosexual gender. Hence, gendered expression, when speaking of normalcy, refers to a culturally relativized heterosexual gendered expression, and queer refers to gendered expressions that are not heterosexual gendered, not necessarily sexual, expression. 12c. This entails a lack of biological essentialism. The human species is not reducible to its biology. See however points 1 and 2, there are biological components of relevance, the species simply isn't reducible to them. 12d. This also entails a significant degree of cultural influence as a methodology whereby sexuality is formulated. There may be some degree of biological component that disposes people this or that way. It ought surprise no one after all that the species may have some disposition towards heterosexuality, but even a casual look at history across all cultures and within the current displays that the degree and manner whereby sexuality is expressed varies. 13. Contraception is a good thing, and modern effective contraception is also a good thing. Specifically because it enables people to more honestly express their gender and sexuality, and because there are fewer negative consequences for doing so. Moreover, birth control in general is a good thing, a rather strikingly defining aspect of the human species, as the intro to this piece suggests. 14. Sexual and gender liberation are good things, as they enable people to live more fulfilling lives, as such pays service and dues to love in ways that are proper. Love being the relevant human emotive expression that enables, perhaps ennobles, human lives. 15. Cultures are formed via familial units and how those familial units are interacting. Not via unicorn cultures, whereby unicorn cultures refers to cultures that are predicated upon mere ideals, ideology, political discourse, etc.
Tu mi abolcho.